It's a pleasure to meet you all again. I wish for all of you to experience true peace and happiness. Eternal Light wants you to stop everything for 30 seconds, close your eyes, and stop all the thoughts racing through your mind. Just observe them without judgment or evaluation. After that, open your eyes and write down what you observed in your mind during that time. Eternal Light is sure that at least 50% of the thoughts you noticed were worries and anxiety. Some people might even have more than that. One thing is clear: worry is always a major barrier. It distracts us, makes us confused, and then we forget about life, forget who we are, and forget the things we need to do to maintain a peaceful life. Recognizing this, Eternal Light created this video for all of you. Please try to focus and listen carefully. If you have time, listen to it multiple times. This is not theory, this is a formula, a secret, and it can also be called a guiding principle on your journey towards deep inner peace. Make sure you're focused. Now you can comment, "Amen, thank God," or hit the like button to truly stay alert. And let's start right away. Do not worry, for God is watching over you. Have you ever woken up in the morning feeling as if you were just pulled out of a dream still incomplete? Not because the dream was too beautiful, but because reality was too cold? Your mind hasn't yet settled into the shape of the day, and already it is enveloped in a thick fog named worry. Work like a machine with no handle, health like a body slowly melting in the invisible hands of time, finances like a ship lost in the storm, and the future, a door without a lock, but also without hinges. I have lived through mornings like that, where each step out of bed felt like a negotiation with fear. We do not worry about the present, for the present is already shaped. We worry about the future, for it is obscure. And in that obscurity, the devil whispers, planting ideas like needles piercing the flesh of the soul. You will not be enough. You will lose everything. No one is coming to save you. But I, once a dreamer of hopeless dreams, now ask you, who told you that you must bear it all alone? Are you truly alone in this world, or have you simply forgotten that you are not the center of the universe, but the beloved of the one who created it all? In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus says something that to me is like a mirror reflecting the human heart. Do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. These words are not mere advice, but a call to awaken. He does not promise an abundance of food or clothing, but proclaims a deeper truth, that worry is a form of denying the presence of God. One cannot truly believe in an almighty God and at the same time live as if abandoned in a cold, indifferent universe. I think of Joseph, betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused and thrown into prison. If anyone had a right to worry, it was him. But he did not collapse under the weight of anxiety because he trusted in divine providence. And God not only delivered him from prison, but raised him to a position of authority in Egypt to save an entire people. That is not a fairy tale. It is a testimony to a sacred truth. God's care is not bound by circumstance. Worry is a ghost, but faith is a light. When you take hold of faith, you do not dispel the darkness with your own strength, but with the light that comes from the Creator. And yet the frightening thing is that we often choose to remain in darkness because light demands surrender. We want control, certainty, possession, but faith demands the opposite, that we let go and allow God to act. Once I read the verses from Philippians 4:6-7, and my heart felt clenched and then released in a long exhale. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God will guard your hearts and your minds. That peace is not the absence of problems, but the presence of the problem solver. It is a divine promise that you will be protected not by calm circumstances, but by the hand of the Almighty. I often imagine myself as a wanderer in a labyrinth. The walls are made of unexplainable circumstances, loss, failure, grim headlines from a broken world. And sometimes I find myself crying out, "Is anyone up there?" But I remember, the Bible never shies away from suffering. Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane sweat drops like blood, overcome with sorrow. He did not deny human emotion, but overcame it through obedience. And that obedience opened the way to salvation. Should we think that we will live untouched by anxiety? No, But the difference is this: we no longer have to fight alone. God does not promise to remove the burden, but to carry it with us. As he says in Matthew 11, verse 28 to 30, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." In this Kafkaesque world, where invisible rules govern and endless corridors of unease wrap around us like cobwebs, there is an invitation to break all that with a simple prayer. Faith is not an easy road. It is not apathy. It is a holy rebellion against despair. It says, even if the world crumbles, even if the storm rises, I will still stand because I know whom I have believed, and he never breaks his promises. So if you wake up one morning and find yourself drowning in anxiety, don't try to banish it with sheer willpower. Step into the inner chamber of your soul, kneel and whisper, "Lord, I do not know what today will bring, but I believe that you do." And then, like a thin veil, worry will quietly drift away, making room for grace to enter. We are not called to understand everything, but we are invited to believe. And in that belief, even when nothing is clear, we still walk forward, because we know that behind everything yet to happen, there is a God who is already watching over us. Chapter 1: The Teachings of Jesus About Worry. Sometimes I feel as though I live inside a giant machine where invisible gears grind both hope and reason into dust. Each day passes like a delayed sentence, and humanity, a fragile, breakable creature burdened with the weight of consciousness, wanders through a maze of the unknown. I used to wonder, is existence itself a sentence? And if that's true, then worry is the prison guard whispering in your ear every night that execution is near, though never saying exactly when. It's in that absurd universe, where man breathes between the invisible walls of fate, that the voice of Jesus rises. Not like a trumpet blast to wake the world, but like a gentle breath passing over the soul's darkness. He says, "Do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear." These words are not abstract symbols, not mere advice from a philosopher perched above the sufferings of man. No, this is the voice of one who once slept on a torn pillow in a boat during a storm, while his disciples panicked and cried out for help. I do not believe Jesus was a stranger to worry. It was in the Garden of Gethsemane that he experienced an anxiety I believe no human has ever truly reached, a level of anguish so intense that his sweat became like drops of blood. And still he said, "Do not worry." Was he asking for the impossible? Or was he revealing to us a secret, a way out of the grim system that has caged us in the prison cells of calculation, projection, and helplessness? I've pondered that question like someone trapped in a maze with no map, relying only on clues that fall from heaven like little handwritten notes. And one of those notes reads, "Life is more than food, and the body more than clothes." A sentence so simple that people might overlook it, but to me, it strikes like a hammer against the arrogant mind of man. Because we've reversed the order. We honor the things that sustain life, yet forget the one who gives life. We count each coin to buy clothes, yet forget that this body is a wondrous creation, not made by human hands, but by the hand of the Creator. Jesus did not deny the basic human needs: eating, clothing, living. He didn't call us to be hermits, nor to withdraw from society. He simply pointed out a painful truth. Worry does not create life. Which of you by worrying can add a single hour to your life? So many nights I've tossed and turned, like a prisoner clutching an imaginary key, believing that if I worry enough, I can avoid suffering. But in the end, it is worry itself that kills life, not calamity. Worry paralyzes, robs the present moment, and drags us into a current we'll never control. I have seen the birds of the air. They do not store grain, yet they sing each morning. I have watched the lilies of the field. They do not spin thread, yet they shine brighter than Solomon's robes. Do these creatures worry less because they are foolish? No, it's because they trust. And that trust is not the act of ignorance. It is the act of pure faith. A kind of faith that humanity, in its diseased complexity, lost long ago when we left the Garden of Eden. Through simple examples, Jesus does not invite us to withdraw from the world, but to change the way we see it. Worry, he teaches, is a sign of distorted faith. We believe everything depends on us. But in a truth that is both brutal and beautiful, he calls us back to the giver of life, the one who sustains the universe not through financial plans, but through unfailing power. I've asked myself, if I am the creation and God is the creator, then do I even have the right to worry? Or is worry a subtle form of arrogance, where I secretly think I understand the future better than the one who made time itself? I don't want to believe that, yet every time I worry, I live as if God does not exist. And to me, that is the most painful form of betrayal, not through action, but through quiet daily attitude. I once saw this truth in the life of the prophet Elijah. When he ran into the wilderness, desperate, and begged God to take his life because he could no longer bear the burden, it was then that God sent an angel with bread and water. No rebuke, no sermon, just care, as if God was saying, I know you're tired, but I'm still here. And Elijah, with the strength from that food, walked 40 days and nights to the mountain of God. Jesus did not come to tell us to shut off emotion, but to save us from being swallowed by it. He understood that anxiety is part of human life, but he would not allow it to become our master. He teaches us how to place that burden into the unseen but steady hands of the Heavenly Father. And when I read the final line in Luke 12:32, "Fear not, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom," I realize that everything we worry about is small when placed next to eternity. If the Father has gladly given us the kingdom of heaven, would he withhold from us a meal, a garment, a resting place for our weary souls? In a world where everything feels like it's falling apart, where time itself seems like a fugitive avoiding the final sentence, the teachings of Jesus about worry are not just advice, they are rescue. Because he doesn't just say, do not worry, he opens the door to a new horizon, where the soul can rest in the arms of one who never slumbers. And I, someone who has lived in the shadowed hallways of doubt, finally found a door, not opened by the key of logic, but by a whisper, "Trust me, for I am still holding you." Chapter 2. Like an endless trance wandering through the shadowy corridors of an invisible court, man drifts among the fragile threads of existence, trembling beneath the cold stare of fate. I often think that if existence itself were an alleged crime we cannot comprehend, then anxiety is the harshest judge against whom we have no defense. And then, in the midst of that panic, the words of Jesus, like a beam of light piercing through the thick night, echo in the Gospel of Luke, gently yet firmly. Do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. That statement is not a dry prohibition, nor a denial of human unease. It is an invitation, a calling to renounce the false god named control and step into the invisible yet ever-present arms of God. Sparrows and wildflowers, two creations seemingly small, trivial, nearly forgotten in the chaotic spin of the cosmos, become sacred evidence of meticulous and impartial care. Sparrows do not sow, do not reap, do not plan budgets for the coming winter, and wildflowers submit no job applications, nor fret about inflation. Yet each fallen feather, each blooming petal, does not escape the eye of the Creator. Here I do not see a beautiful randomness, but a deliberate intention, so deliberate it becomes terrifying, as though every wing beat of a bird had been written into a book before time began. Jesus, through a grand reversal, raised the ordinary, birds, flowers, to the central figures of a divine symphony, and through this inversion he emphasized, if God cares for such small things, how much more for you? But what shook me was not merely that reverse logic. It was his invitation to believe something irrational to the mortal mind, that we, amid our overlapping doubts, pains, and disappointments, are still being actively cared for. To believe that, in this world, is nearly an act of madness, but it is a sacred madness. I remember Mr. A, an ordinary laborer I felt I once encountered in the corridors of Prague's train station, where men who have long abandoned hope tend to huddle against the wind. He lost his job, and in a normal world that would feel like a verdict, a social sentence. But he did not react like Joseph K. in the trial, frantically rushing between invisible offices to save himself. He chose the paradoxical, to pray, not to ask for a solution, but to pray as a surrender, a way to unseat himself from the throne of his own life. And in that surrender, something strange happened. A new job appeared, more fitting, closer to home, as though God had been waiting for him at a turn he never dared to imagine. Mr. A's story is not a miracle in the traditional sense. It lacks the spectacle of the parted Red Sea or the multiplication of loaves and fish. But it is the kind of miracle I believe is the most common. The quiet, precise intervention of a God who is never absent. Just like when Elijah was fed by ravens and bread from heaven, 1 Kings 17, or when the widow of Zarephath found her flour and oil never ran out during the famine, God's care is always something that leaves us both astonished and ashamed because we once doubted. And so I wonder, could life not be a series of closed doors as I once believed? Might it be that behind each locked room where man believes he's been abandoned, there still lingers a whisper, inviting us to lay down our burden of worry? And if that's true, then anxiety is not merely a weakness, but a nervous reflex of a soul severed from faith. It's like when the Israelites in the desert, even after witnessing pillars of cloud and fire and water from the rock, still grumbled and doubted, Numbers 14. Worry is the result of short memory, when we forget that we are children of a king, not lost wanderers in an existential maze. I write these lines not as one who has grasped the truth, but as one falling, desperately clinging to a notion that is hard to accept, that there exists a care beyond logic, a love without reason, a grace that needs no proof. And if Jesus, in human flesh, once lived a homeless life, went hungry, was betrayed, and still declared, "My Father cares for me," then who am I to doubt? In Kafka's world, everything is bleak, but never utterly hopeless. Even in the final corridor, condemned without clear charge, there glimmers something beyond human law. And in that dim light, the words of Christ about sparrows, wildflowers, and doors opening become the only thing real. Truth does not lie in proof, but in surrender, like Mr. A, like Elijah, like the sparrow. And I, a writer, a skeptic, a prisoner of tangled dreams, am learning to believe as they did, not with reason, but with the soul. Chapter 3. I once thought that anxiety was a faint echo coming from within the walls of the mind, not loud enough to be called a scream, but persistent enough to become a background melody of existence. In the dark of night, when all sounds cease, it is this anxiety that becomes the uninvited whisper, awakening an unnamed unease. But then, from the deepest recesses of consciousness, that place Freud called the unconscious, and Kierkegaard described as where the soul confronts the infinite, I realized anxiety is not just a psychological issue, it is a spiritual symptom. And in that pain, I suddenly recalled the words of Jesus, "Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you." That invitation is not merely a comfort, it is a diagnosis of the disorder of the soul when it forgets who is the Lord of its life. From a psychologist's perspective, anxiety is a natural response of the brain to uncertainty. It is a silent warning that we have lost control over the future, something the brain, for survival's sake, craves desperately. But in that desire to control, we create an illusion that if we worry enough, think enough, plan enough, everything will be okay. In truth, it will not. Anxiety simply causes us to repeat the same cycle, predicting, failing, fearing, then predicting again. It is a maze where every dead end is named, "What if?" What if I lose my job? What if I am abandoned? What if I am not good enough? But that what if never ends, multiplying like mold in the mind, until life becomes nothing but a series of conditions that never happen. I once found myself in that state, living as though I were the gatekeeper of a door that would not open, like the character in Before the Law, only to realize that my greatest fear was not what would come, but the feeling of not being able to know what would come. But then, when I read Paul's letter to the Philippians, I encountered a statement contrary to the survival instinct of humanity. The peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. I was speechless. Peace does not come from understanding everything, but from surrender. And in that surrender, I found life fuller than any logic could provide. Spirituality does not deny psychology. It does not encourage us to pretend not to worry, nor does it call us to act blind to suffering. True spirituality looks straight into the abyss and dares to believe that there is one still standing there, holding our hand though we cannot see. That is why, when Jesus rebuked his disciples for their anxiety, he did not tell them to be strong, but asked, "Why are you so afraid, O you of little faith?" He did not care whether they were anxious. He cared where that anxiety came from from a rift between them and their heavenly Father. As for me, to be honest, I have believed in God yet still worried. Just as Peter walked on water but sank when he saw the wind, I too walked in faith, only to collapse under the pressure of an unknown future. But Jesus did not let Peter sink forever. He reached out his hand to lift him up. This proves the truth. Anxiety does not destroy our relationship with God. It merely exposes the true depth of our faith. And it is in that moment, when we are sinking, that his hand becomes more real than ever. In the Old Testament, I see this clearly through Joseph's life. Sold into slavery, falsely accused, forgotten in prison, if anyone had reason to worry, it was him. But he did not choose anxiety. He chose faith. Not because he was fearless, but because he knew that God was writing a story bigger than his fear. And indeed, in the end, it was Joseph who stood before Pharaoh, not a man afraid, but one carrying the peace of the dream giver. I write these words not to preach a formula for anxiety, but to confess a struggle between flesh and spirit. I was once a trembling body, afraid of the future, until I understood. Peace is not the result of controlling the future, but the product of handing that future over to one who knows better than I. Since I grasped this, I do not stop worrying, but I worry less. For I am no longer alone in my anxiety. I am not Franz Kafka, abandoned in a legal corridor with no way out, but a soul learning to believe that there is another door, not the door of the court, but the door of grace. And as Jesus said, that door is always open to those who knock, not with the hand of reason, but with a broken heart, not by planning, but by surrendering, not through works, but through faith. It is there I begin to live, not as the one controlling everything, but as a child being cared for. And so, in the maze of existence, filled with darkness, a flicker of light shines, hope. Not a vague hope, but hope placed in one who holds the universe and my soul in his hand. Chapter 4. I once believed there was no escape for a mind bound by the chains of anxiety. Every morning felt like a trial where I was the accused, relentlessly judged for crimes I hadn't even committed. What if I'm not good enough? What if I fail? What if I'm forgotten? And since there was no defense for the unseen, I sank into a state of hopelessness, despair, and an indescribable sense of being lost. But then, like a whisper cutting through a wall of darkness, the words of the Apostle Paul echoed in my mind. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. That wasn't just a comforting phrase. It was a summons of the soul to the throne of grace, a place where I was no longer the defendant, but a child called to come. In my world, prayer was not simply a religious act. It was the door opening between the sealed walls. It was the pause where a troubled soul could breathe, not by air, but by hope. I once thought prayer was a way to report things to God, but the more I prayed, the more I realized I wasn't informing him. I was surrendering. In prayer, I didn't change God. I allowed him to change me. And when I combined that with thanksgiving, I began to see that the burdens I thought I was carrying were actually living proof that God was still concerned for me. The atheist worries because they think no one cares for them, but the believer still worries, then suddenly remembers, I still have someone who listens. I think of Daniel, who was thrown into the lion's den, not for a crime, but because he prayed 3 times a day. How strange that he prayed, and the price was death. Yet it was in the most fearful place, amidst the claws, that the presence of God was the clearest. Daniel wasn't saved from the den, he was kept in the den. I see myself in that. Not as a hero, but as a small soul asking for comfort amid the thick smoke of worry. And in that moment, I learned that the miracle isn't being freed from all anxiety, but being able to exist with a peaceful heart while anxiety still lurks around us like a hungry lion. But how can that heart be at peace when every early morning my mind calls out all the calamities yet to come? I began to understand something that Jesus taught. Living in the present isn't the philosophy of an optimist. It's the discipline of a believer. Do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Jesus didn't deny that each day has trouble. He only emphasized that we should carry one day at a time. When I try to carry the next 50 days all at once, I'm like a prisoner carrying multiple sentences at once. That's what drives a person mad. Not reality, but an imagination that never stops. And I, in my most troubled years, was defeated not by what happened, but by what never happened. Jesus doesn't call us to escape from reality, but to walk in that reality with our eyes fixed on Him. Just like Peter stepped out of the boat looking at Jesus and the water beneath his feet became solid. Only when he took his eyes off Jesus and looked at the wind did he begin to sink. I am the same. When I look at the bills unpaid, at the unclear future, at the voices of the world, I sink. But when I focus on the present and look to Him, I live. Though the sea still rages, my heart is calm. The miracle isn't that the storm stops, but that I am no longer a victim of fear. I gradually came to understand a truth. My biggest problem wasn't that I didn't have a solution, but that I had the wrong priorities. Jesus exposed that mercilessly. But seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. I used to reverse the order, worry about life, food, clothing, position in society, and then remember God as a last resort. But His kingdom doesn't work that way. It doesn't offer peace as a reward for calculation. It comes like a stream from relationship. When I put Him first, it wasn't because I was wise, but because I was so weary. And in that weariness, I found peace. Not from possessing everything, but from surrendering everything. I am no longer the confused traveler walking in the darkness of unanswered questions. I still walk through the darkness, but now I walk with the one who is the light. It's not that I no longer worry, but I've learned how to walk in worry without letting it devour my soul. I've learned to breathe, not just with my lungs, but with faith. I've learned to give thanks, not just for the good, but for the things I don't yet understand. And above all, I've learned to trust, not in the future, but in the one who holds the future. I write this not from a lofty tower, but from the cramped rooms of my own soul, where each day is a small battle between worry and promise. And I, just like you, am simply a soul trying to remind myself of what God said thousands of years ago. Do not worry. Not because the world will be easier, but because the one who keeps us is the one who never changes. He is God, yesterday, today, and forever. The one who never sleeps while I tremble and never misses a prayer, no matter how small. Final chapter. I once lived in a house with no windows, not because of a lack of architecture, but because my mind had sealed every gap with curtains of anxiety. The light couldn't come in because I feared it would expose my imperfections. And in that darkness, I wondered, is worry the inherent nature of humankind, or is it a disease we learn to carry? The truth, I think, is that it is both. Worry is something born of imagination, but it is also a wake-up call that our souls have forgotten we have a refuge. If life were a trial, worry would be the defense lawyer for the devil. It whispers, screams, and begs us to prepare for the worst. But God does not invite us to be the accused. He calls us His children. In the days when I hunched under the weight of vague forebodings, I suddenly realized it wasn't the world outside that wore me out, but the voice inside me, the one constantly arguing that everything would collapse. And then I encountered Paul again, the one who had been shackled, imprisoned, and beaten, but in that very condition, he wrote, "Do not be anxious about anything." I imagined him writing those words in a damp, windowless cell without an escape, but filled with a freedom that no one could take. He did not write from comfort, but from communion with God, the one who transcends all suffering through an absolute presence. Jesus did not teach peace as a theory, but as a way of life, even as a sacrifice. He walked among people who were disordered, panicked, and despairing, and simply said, "Do not be afraid." Those words did not come from an angel in heaven, but from a man covered in sweat about to climb the cross. I wonder if he, the one who bore all sin, could still say, "Do not be afraid." Then surely I, who only bear a few anxieties, should be able to live by faith. That faith does not promise I will avoid harm, but gives me the power to rise again after every fall without shame. Faith, in my view, is not a virtue displayed in church gatherings, but the pillow where I lay my head and cry each night when no one is watching. I once doubted God's love because of things I didn't understand. Why I was abandoned, why the one I loved was sick, why the world was full of injustices. But gradually I learned that God's love cannot be measured by the state of the world, but by the cross. not by his silence and with the question why, but by the only answer, I love you to death. And I began to believe, not that everything would be okay, but that he would be with me even when everything wasn't okay. That was a transformation in my soul, from trying to control to resting in trust. Worry is the longing to control what we cannot. Faith is accepting to let go when we know our hands are smaller than God's. When I let go, he holds. When I am silent, he speaks. When I cry, he embraces. I remember Moses, who once killed a man, ran away, and was called by God in the midst of a burning bush. Moses worried, was afraid, and refused. I'm not eloquent. Who am I to be chosen by God? And God did not answer by praising Moses. He simply said, I will be with you. That is the answer that worry can never defeat. It's not who I am, but who is with me. We are not called to live a life without worry. That is impossible in a fallen world. But we are called to walk through worry without being owned by it. Just as a ship does not sink because of the water around it, but only sinks when water comes inside, my soul only falls when I let the voices from outside become the voices within. And so I choose to live differently. I choose to pray, not to change God's will, but to change my soul. I choose to give thanks, not because I have everything, but because he is everything. I choose to live in the present, not because the past no longer hurts or the future is no longer fearful, but because only in the present can I meet him. I choose to seek his kingdom, not because I'm good, but because I have run out of other choices. And at that moment, peace, as Paul describes it, which surpasses all understanding, begins to pour in, like light creeping through the thickest curtains. Someone once asked me, how do you know God is still taking care of you when everything is falling apart? And I could only answer, because I'm still here. Because even though I've wanted to disappear many times, he still keeps me here. Perhaps the final lesson I've learned is not in theory, but in a very simple reality. He does not promise that I will not hurt, but promises that I will not be alone. And in a world where loneliness is the affliction of millions, the presence of a God who loves me enough to die for me is the only healing I need. So, dear friend, if you are anxious, do not feel weak. You are simply living in a broken world. But let your heart remember, there is one who is never broken. There is a love that never changes. There is a peace that does not come from everything being calm, but from his presence. And when you let go, not of everything, but just of your own self, you will find that you are not falling into nothingness. You are falling into the hands of God. And that is the only place where anxiety has no power anymore.